Felix the Cat is the fantastical breakthrough creation of the Pat Sullivan Studio, and the first cartoon character ever created specifically for animated films. Debuting in 1919, Felix quickly won worldwide acclaim, breaking ground as the first licensed and mass merchandise character, thus becoming the debut cartoon superstar. With almost 200 shorts to his name by the end of the 1920s, Felix fell out of audience favour with the arrival of a slew of revolutionary sound and colour characters, and found himself struggling to reclaim his title. With numerous reboots launching over the decades to varying degrees of success, it's a struggle he still faces today. In 2019, Felix the Cat turns 100 years old, and to celebrate I will trace his entire evolution from 1919 to now. To do so, we will look at the character's history and the changes in his design, personality and stylistic approach prevalent across a century of shorts, television series and feature films, in this edition of Cartoon Evolution. In the early 1900s, animation as we know it today began to take shape. While many of the earliest films were highly experimental, animated film series starring cartoon characters began to take the art form in exciting new directions as early as 1913. Cartoon short series starring the likes of Mutt and Jeff and Crazy Cat became wildly popular with audiences, while the innovative efforts of the Fleischer Studio with their long-running series Out of the Inkwell debuting in 1918 captivated the world. Originally, theatres would play cartoons on a bill, often known as a magazine, alongside a newsreel and other short subjects, preceding a feature film or two. When major studios in Hollywood realised the growing thirst for cartoons, with some audiences showing up specifically for them, they scrambled for animation houses who could produce shorts to be played alongside their films. One such animation studio that arose in this period was that of 30-year-old Australian cartoonist Pat Sullivan. With only small and sporadic work in Australia, Sullivan had spent more than 5 years travelling in search of employment, spending much of his time destitute. He landed many odd jobs in London, but later moved to New York to further his prospects. There he found work as an assistant newspaper cartoonist and later as an artist at Raoul Barre's pioneering cartoon studio. Sullivan will be let go from Barre's after only a few months for reported general incompetence and unsatisfactory work. However, in his short time there, Sullivan saw the growing interest in animated shorts firsthand and felt he'd learned enough to go it alone. Animation historian Michael Barrier suggests it was Universal Studios co-founder and treasurer Pat Powers who coaxed Sullivan into opening his own studio sometime between 1915 and 1916, considering he almost immediately won a contract with him. Sullivan began producing a series of cartoons starring a young African-American child named Sammy Johnson, based on popular comic strip character Sambo, and by 1917 was producing a series featuring one of the biggest movie stars of the era, Charlie Chaplin. Among Sullivan's rapidly formed studio team was an artist in his mid-20s named Otto Messmer, who had caught Sullivan's attention after developing a character named Motor Matt for Powers. Sullivan named Messmer head animator and soon director, focusing on the business end of the company himself. Regardless, Sullivan would be the only credited artist on the shorts, with his studio staff producing work under his name. Sullivan's time with Powers and Universal was relatively short-lived, with the relationship severed in mid-1919 for undocumented reasons. This made it possible for Sullivan to be poached by John King of Famous Players, later Paramount Studios, to produce a cartoon for inclusion in the Paramount Screen magazine. Sullivan took up the offer and the studio produced Feline Follies, featuring a black cat named Master Tom, who spends the cartoon wooing a female cat. The short allegedly took 6 months to complete, and because he was utterly inexperienced in a new and highly technical art, Sullivan claimed he had a nervous breakdown, resulting in a 5-week hospitalization. Sullivan in fact believed the short to be a gigantic failure and showed the character committing suicide in the finale, assuming it would be a one and done. However, to Sullivan's surprise, King loved the short and released it on November 9, 1919 to audience acclaim. More more Master Tom shorts were commissioned, with a second, titled Musical Muse, produced rapidly and released later that month, and a third released the following. Both shorts are amongst a vast number of early Felix films considered lost today. The third short, titled The Adventures of Felix, would debut the character's new name, and just like that, Felix the Cat was born. And while no documentation exists as to why the name was changed, one could imagine that filmmakers likely wanted something cuter and more appealing for a series than Master Tom. However, the creation of Felix really isn't as simple as it may seem. In fact, the true creator of Felix is one of Hollywood's greatest mysteries. As put by animation historian John Canemaker, the creator of Felix the Cat is actually two people, the result of a symbiotic relationship between a producer and a very creative artist and animator and director. While the creation may have been symbiotic, each artist had their own version of events. In 1925, Pat Sullivan was quoted in an Australian newspaper as saying, "I made the cat and the cat made me," and throughout his life was adamant that he was the sole creator of Felix. He would additionally claim that the idea of the character was given to him by the sight of a cat which his wife brought to the office one day. In an alternate or perhaps mutually exclusive take, animation historian Charles Solomon suggests that Sullivan had also cited Rudyard Kipling's short story The Cat That Walked by Himself as an inspiration. Sullivan would note that the character's name was taken from the term Australia Felix, Latin for Lucky Australia, Fortunate Australia, or Happy Australia, given by 19th century explorer Thomas Mitchell to the lush pastures of the pre-colonial land of the Australian state of Victoria. Australia Felix would also be the title of a 1917 book by author Henry Handel Richardson, which Sullivan was supposedly quite fond of. Therefore, the character would essentially be christened Happy Cat or Lucky Cat. The personality of the character was said to be inspired by Charlie Chaplin, with Felix designed as a feline manifestation of Sullivan's earlier animated version of him. Sullivan would claim that he wrote, directed, and animated the entirety of Feline Follies by himself, an enormous workload he attributed to his breakdown. Sullivan, however, has been accused by some of being a master showman, while Canemaker has referred to Otto Messmer as a passive, quiet man, who never got the public credit he deserved as the true creator of Felix, and never asked for it either. At that, it was close to 45 years after Sullivan's death that Messmer would publicly claim himself to be the sole creator. He claimed that when King came to the studio with the Paramount magazine pitch, Sullivan pushed it in Messmer's direction due to his busy workload, allowing him to do as he wished as long as it was done on the side at home. Messmer would say, "I figured a cat would be about the simplest, make him all black. You wouldn't need to worry about outlines," noting that a cat would also allow one gag after the other. Despite claiming he personally came up with most of the Felix titles and stories, Messmer never claimed sole production of the work, with additional animators and studio assistants lending a hand. Michael Barrier would note, "The Felix cartoons were Messmer's creations far more than Sullivan's." In Messmer's account of the events, the name Felix actually came from King, who'd been inspired by the Latin words Felix or Felicity, again meaning happy, lucky, or fortuitous, and also for their similarity to the Latin felis or feline, meaning cat. Again, he was Happy Cat or Lucky Cat. Canemaker would not attribute the personality of Felix under Messmer's control with Chaplin, but with Messmer himself, saying, "What you see on the screen is really a manifestation of Otto Messmer's personality." Whether Sullivan or Messmer was the sole creator is subject to much debate. Many Australian animation fans and historians will argue vehemently that Felix is absolutely the creation of Sullivan, with Australian actor Max Cullen calling claims to the contrary another example of American hype, propaganda, and thievery. In fact, there is some solid evidence in defense of Sullivan. Perhaps most convincing is the existence of a copyright on a lost short titled The Tale of Thomas Cat, produced by by Sullivan in 1917 and a likely precursor to the Master Tom cat in Feline Follies. This shows that the idea of a cat character, and by extension Felix himself, may in fact have a longer history at the studio than previously believed. Sullivan even littered previous shorts with cats similar in appearance to Felix's early design. However, there is nothing that rules out the possibility that Messmer was behind these characters too. Many historians have also come to the conclusion that much of the lettering on the Felix shorts matches Sullivan's comic strip lettering, citing Australian spelling of some words as a dead giveaway. But again, just because he inked the words doesn't prove he also inked the animation. Messmer's claims have also been criticised as conveniently coming to light in a period where Sullivan could not refute them. However, many studio staff, including Sullivan's own lawyer, have backed Messmer's turn of events. That said, we do have to take into account Sullivan's notoriety as a master showman, as well for his well-known feral sensibilities, as described by animation historian Russell Merritt. Many of Sullivan's artists have alleged over time that he was an infamously ill-tempered and erratic alcoholic who was always too drunk to contribute creatively, and Michael Barrier even asserts that at the height of his success, after abandoning his supervisory role to Messmer, he rarely even turned up to work, making it seem unlikely he could have been as hands-on as he'd lead us to believe. It also needs to be noted that Messmer's claims speak volumes about the state of the animation industry of the time, with many superiors claiming the work of their employees, most notably Walt Disney claiming sole creation of Mickey Mouse, who he co-created with Ub Iwerks. As an Australian, I would love to unabashedly claim Felix the Cat as a product of my country, but I find it hard to make any definitive stance. If we take that example of Disney and Iwerks, with Disney as the creative genius behind Mickey and Iwerks the artistic genius, we could easily substitute Sullivan and Messmer respectively. Again, as Canemaker says, Felix the Cat was created by two people. Let's leave it at that. Regardless of his genesis, one thing is abundantly clear. Felix the Cat rapidly became a household name and a true phenomenon. He was undeniably the first cartoon superstar, alleviated by him being the first cartoon character created specifically for the animated medium, with those preceding him spawned from newspaper strips. While Felix would appear mostly as a regular cat in Feline Follies, with a dash of anthropomorphism thrown in for comedic effect, over the following shorts he would become more and more anthropomorphized, presented almost as a man in a cat suit. Felix's main draw was his magical, charismatic nature, spawning situations that were highly whimsical and creating fantasy wherever he went. Critics have noted that he is a representation of how a child views the world through the eyes of wonder. One of his main hallmarks was the quirky and imaginative use of his tail, which could transform at whim to complement any situation, solve any problem, or vocalize any exclamation. Felix would routinely ruminate while pacing back and forth, perhaps his most famous and recognizable trademark. When left feeling helpless, he would look to the audience for assistance, breaking the fourth wall. Felix's personality and his comedic and artistic styles were revolutionary, shaping and inspiring those of cartoons going forward, such as the 1925 revival of Crazy Cat, Walt Disney's Julius from his Alice comedies, and even Mickey Mouse himself. Canemaker put it best when he said, "You'll find under the mouse, there's a cat." Felix's cunning and fanciful nature and the surrealist style of his shorts could likewise be seen as a precursor to the screwball style pioneered by Tex Avery and Robert Clampett on the Looney Tunes 2 decades later. By 1920, Sullivan's studio was producing at least one Felix a month, but following the economic slump of 1920-1921, the Paramount magazine was cancelled and the Felix shorts decommissioned. Sullivan took Felix to Margaret J. Winkler, the revolutionary distributor of the Fleischers out of the Inkwell and later Disney's earlier shorts, where the studio began pumping out one cartoon every 2 weeks. In fact, most years under Winkler, they would issue 13 to 15 cartoons and would release over 20 in 1924 alone. That's more in a single year than Mickey Mouse ever accomplished. In 1925, Sullivan entered into what has been described as a more lucrative distribution arrangement with Educational Pictures, where the studio continued with their one-a-fortnight release pattern. With Felix's earlier designs angular in nature, some even saying he more resembled a fox or a dog, he was gradually softened, with Messmer citing difficulties with moving the angles. In 1924, he was transformed with a circular, more streamlined design by Messmer's guest artist Bill Nolan. Nolan's design enabled smoother movement and allowed Felix's body to do anything artists desired, essentially creating a rubber hose animation in the process, so called after the character's free-moving limbs resembling rubber hoses. Messmer said, "Rounding out was easier. A ball was easier to turn, for instance, than a box or an angle. It's much smoother and easier to look at." The design change would also result in Felix looking cuter, and is said to have greatly increased his popularity. In 1923, Felix would make the jump from animation to comic strips, becoming the first character to transfer from film to comic. Sullivan would put himself in charge of the writing and inking, however Messmer would take over in 1927, producing them until the mid-1940s. Here, Felix's design would always reflect his current look in the films. Soon after the launch of the comic strips, the assertive business mogul that was Sullivan began licensing official Felix merchandise, ranging everything from the ever-popular Felix doll to clocks, cigarettes, stationery, and homeware. Felix would thus also become the first licensed and mass merchandised character ever, with a model that would be later revolutionized by Walt Disney on a grander scale with Mickey Mouse. Felix's influence, reach, and stardom were immediately noticeable, arguably spawning the notion of popular culture. In 1922, he was made a mascot of the New York Yankees. In 1923, Paul Whiteman's jazz band released a popular song called "Felix Kept On Walking." In 1925 film Go West, silent legend Buster Keaton would parody Felix's famous pacing, and in 1927, Felix appeared as the first ever giant character balloon in the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade. It's even said that a Felix doll was owned by the young Queen Elizabeth of England, where Felix was wildly popular. It's been suggested perhaps even more so than in America. Felix's popularity was satirized in 1923's Felix in Hollywood, in which he rubbed elbows with Hollywood's elite, Douglas Fairbanks, Cecil B. DeMille, and Charlie Chaplin, among others. Felix also became arguably the first star of television, as an image of his doll rotating on a turntable was broadcast by RCA NBC to test cameras and transmission. These experimental broadcasts lasted hours at a time and were done sporadically over a decade, starting in 1928. Felix was then featured on the first commercial TV broadcast in 1939. Unfortunately, Felix's peak stardom was short-lived, as the innovation of sound, pioneered by the Warner Brothers studio in the 1927 feature The Jazz Singer, began to sweep Hollywood. Educational Pictures strongly insisted that the Felix films were to be continued as talkies, but Sullivan, set in his ways like much of the industry, refused to conform. Meanwhile, other young filmmakers such as the Fleischers and Disney were, in Canemaker's words, jumping on the bandwagon. And with the release of the debut Mickey Mouse cartoon Steamboat Willie, the first to utilize complex synchronized sound, audiences rapidly found themselves a new favorite cartoon star, leaving Felix in the dust. Further disputes between Sullivan and Educational led to a partnership breakdown. Sullivan quickly clambered to catch up, partnering with Copley Pictures in 1929 to release sound films. However, Sullivan, seemingly with less innovative drive than his competitors and an aversion to invest in the proper equipment, began by simply reworking existing cartoons by removing intertitles and adding slapdash sound effects and dialogue. He would produce 12 new sound shorts between 1929 and 1930, however still produced them as silent shorts and post-synchronize them. Audiences certainly noticed the laziness, finding the reissued and new shorts to be less refined than and vastly inferior to the works produced by other studios, who created with sound in mind. Cartoon historian Ian Gordon has even argued that the addition of sound undermined the nature of Felix's silent character, with audiences not taking to the new talking version. After obvious failure, Copley Pictures terminated their contract with Sullivan in 1930, who failed to get back up on his feet. In 1932, Sullivan's wife died suddenly, and he was sent spiraling into a depression, with his alcoholism becoming worse than ever. By 1933, Sullivan had practically drunk himself to death, passing away from alcohol-induced pneumonia, forcing the studio to close down. In such a short 14-year period, the Sullivan studio had produced over 170 Felix shorts. Messmer would, however, continue to create Felix comics until the mid-1950s, and for years, without legal ownership, fought off distributor requests to purchase the character. Though in 1935, the Van Buren Studios managed to secure the rights to Felix from Sullivan's brother, offering to wholly produce a series of sound shorts in Technicolor. Messmer was asked to head an animation team but declined. Ex-Pat Sullivan animator Burt Gillett, who had gone on to direct such groundbreaking silly symphonies for Disney such as Flowers and Trees and The Three Little Pigs, was instead put in charge, infusing the shorts with the recognizable Disney style in an effort to give Felix a more popular design in an era where not only Mickey Mouse, but Donald Duck and Goofy were dominating the screen. Felix was stripped of much of his personality and relegated to a simple childlike funny animal character. Sadly, Gillett failed in his effort to blend the fresh Disney style with outdated rubber hose sensibilities, an East versus West Coast artistic blend, with historians noting a lack of energy and imagination and an inability to capture the Disney charm. Van Buren only released 3 shorts in 1936 before the studio pulled the plug. The Felix shorts would be some of Van Buren's last, in fact, with the studio closing only a year later, likewise falling victim to the rapidly growing Disney empire. Having been running as bi-monthly comic books since the mid-1940s, Messmer retired from the publications in 1954, with his longtime assistant Joe Oriolo, the co-creator of Casper the Friendly Ghost, taking his place. Following a small resurgence of the character, whose early shorts were being screened on television with added soundtracks, Oriolo would partner with the then Felix owner William O'Sullivan, Sullivan's nephew, to create a television series in 1958. Felix returned to his original home of Paramount Cartoon Studios for production, while Translux handled syndicated distribution. Felix the Cat was produced in limited animation, common for early television cartoons, which utilized shortcuts such as held cells and recycled animation to make production easier, cheaper, and faster. The design of the series, which was aimed at a children's audience, returned very much to the style of Van Buren's shorts, with Felix appearing cute, innocent, and Disney-esque, drawn in a circular style with much longer legs. Felix took on a tamer, less fanciful, and duller personality, and episodes usually focused around antagonists attempting to steal his magic bag of tricks, a new element now synonymous with the character, which could transform into anything he willed it to, much like his tail in the original shorts. A cast of recurring characters was even devised around Felix, making the show more of an ensemble piece. Felix the Cat was amongst the first animated series created for television, and ran for a total of 260 episodes between 1959 and 1962, bringing the character back into the popular zeitgeist. It remained largely popular during its original run and rotated in syndication for decades after. By 1971, Oriolo took complete control and ownership of the Felix character. By the mid-1980s, Felix had become largely forgotten amongst mainstream audiences once again, and Don Oriolo, the son of Joe, devised a plan to produce the first ever Felix feature film based on the version of the character featured in the TV series. The film was written by Don and saw Felix travel to an alternate dimension to save a magical kingdom from an evil ruler. Initially, Joe was set to direct, but his death in 1985 saw Hungarian filmmaker Tibor Hernandi take the reins. To complete the movie on a modest budget, Don paired with various animation studios around Eastern Europe, and while it was completed sometime in 1986 or 1987 and planned for a Thanksgiving 1987 theatrical release, it would eventually be relegated as direct-to-video in 1991. In an era where the Disney studio were experiencing a renaissance and producing spectacularly innovative and popular films, Felix the Cat the movie failed to resonate with audiences and ended a critical failure. Despite this, the movie did bring Felix back into the public eye, albeit briefly, and led to the inception of 1995 television series The Twisted Tales of Felix the Cat, produced by Film Roman. The series utilized stylized modern animation, which at the time took a Fleischer Studios Tex Avery style edge. The series shared similarities with others of the time, such as Ren and Stimpy and Rocko's Modern Life. In fact, one of the series' lead writers, Martin Olson, had worked extensively on Rocko. In essence, the show presented a cruder, edgier take on the character, returning him to his cunning and mischievous foundations and allowing a surreal nature to return to his shorts. While being more or less a reboot of Oriolo's television series, it was also a tongue-in-cheek parody of it, which appealed more with modern audiences. The series came to an end in 1996 after a total of 2 seasons and 21 episodes with 58 short segments. Felix's next and currently final foray into television was Japanese anime Baby Felix, which was produced by Don and animated by Radix, airing between 2000 and 2001 for 26 episodes. The series followed the babification trend of the era, which saw numerous series rebooted in baby form. It applied the formula to the characters of the Oriolo series, which was largely popular in Japan, having received a Japanese dub as early as 1960. Here, Felix appeared much as he had in that series, but in a younger design, wearing a onesie. His personality, however, would retain the mischievousness of Twisted Tales. In the early 2000s, Don Oriolo planned a trilogy of Felix feature-length movies, which were to be produced, directed, and written by him and released straight to home media. The first, Felix Saves Christmas, basically an extended TV special, was produced in limited digital animation by Taiwanese studio SMEC. The movie, released to DVD in 2004, was geared towards a children's audience, with tame, toned-down humor and gags, and was unsurprisingly not a major success. Felix Saves Christmas sadly couldn't save Felix, and likely due to lukewarm reception and possibly sales, the other 2 movies were not produced. In 2014, Don Oriolo sold the Felix rights to DreamWorks Animation, who planned to exploit his lucrative marketing potential rather than star him in new productions. Following their acquisition of DreamWorks Animation in 2016, Felix now rests in the hands of NBC Universal, who have likewise not utilized the property in visual media, with Felix Saves Christmas remaining the final Felix production 15 years on. Perhaps Felix's style and sensibilities simply aren't all that appealing in this modern market, while characters such as Mickey Mouse and Bugs Bunny have managed to adapt and stay relevant with the times. The bittersweet truth of it is, perhaps Felix was never destined to be a star, but quite simply an icon. And evidently, the idea of Felix is still one that people love, as the heavily continued use of his face on merchandising, especially in Asia, retains his iconic status, well known by people around the world 100 years after his birth. And at that, it's over to you guys out there. I want to know, how do you feel about Felix the Cat, and what is your favourite of his very few iterations? Throw away in the comments below and let me know your thoughts. If this is your first time viewing one of my videos and you'd like to see more like it in the future, then please don't forget to hit that big old subscribe button up on your screen, as well as that like button down below for that little extra support. Also, don't forget to check me out on social media, and please consider supporting me over on Patreon. Thanks for watching and have a fantastic day.